Hey there, fellow city builders. CodiakTheKodiak here. If you're new, welcome aboard. This is the second episode in my small town build series, so don't worry if you missed out on episode 1. You can easily catch up by clicking on the annotation up above or checking out in the playlist down below. We're gonna dive straight into episode 2 here. If you guys remember last week, we kind of just did a ton of planning and we built out one of the public beaches on the other side of town. Today, we build out the high school, some of the neighborhood around it, and a little bit of the shopping area across the street. I did some minor detailing to the school, but I plan on doing some more next week. For the shopping center, we mostly just built the actual structure of the building and the parking lot around it. I also decided that there was plenty more room for another development over here, so I thought that it would be cool to put in some McMansions maybe on the backside of the shopping center to kind of show that it's a bit more of a newer development rather than some of the older developments in the area like ranch homes or colonial style. I also started working on the gas station that's going to go over with the shopping complex. Growing up, all of the shopping centers kind of had a gas station either attached to it or really close by so people could easily get gas whenever they were going grocery shopping, because a lot of people didn't really live in the town and they lived far away, so they would just stop at the gas station when they went for their weekly grocery trip. A lot of times, those shopping centers would also have their own brand of gas station. For example, here in Michigan, we have D&W and Family Fare, and they have their own gas station that's always attached to it. Same with Meijer, which is also here and relevant in the state. We ended up going with a Safeway, so I'm not sure if Safeway has its own brand of gas station, but I just chose another gas station asset that I thought looked really nice. You'll see me fiddle around with it for a little while, trying to get it to look exactly kind of how I wanted it to. Sometimes I don't pay attention to the actual sloping up from the curb where vehicles can come in and out, and I usually just let them drive over the curb because it's a video game. But in this build, I decided to maybe take the time and actually make cars have to drive up curbs for this gas station. I also went and changed almost all the roads in the town. I didn't really like how every single one of them had a road arrow on it. Where I come from, there's not really road arrows anywhere, and there's also not road lines like the yellow lines on the road. So I went with a different type of road that at least had the yellow lines, but didn't have the arrows everywhere because to me, it was just really distracting. The high school I went with was one of the Toronto high schools. My original thought was that this would be a K through 12 school. So here in the United States, we have kindergarten and then 1st through 12th grade. And the school I went to growing up was like that. It was kindergarten through 12th grade, all in one building. Each grade had a different classroom. Sometimes it was broken up into 2 classes, but it was all in the same building, just in different wings. And I thought that that could work really well in this area, just have one school complex as to not take up a large part of the town for both buildings. Kind of symbolize that the town's been there a while and they maybe only had enough room for one school building or enough need for one school building and have been constantly kind of expanding that area ever since. I might go back on that though after building it, and maybe we might do an elementary school somewhere. That's kind of dependent on how the towns or the surrounding area are. If there is another town that I think could maybe sustain a school, I might just give them an elementary school, and then my thought process would be maybe that they would bus the high schoolers over and then they would all share this high school together, and then we'll do 2 smaller elementary schools for each town because this high school is a little big. Another thing you guys might notice is that I included a lot of parking in this high school. Where I grew up, my high school had an ample amount of parking. There was parking for all of the students up front, and there was extra parking in the back, and all of the sporting fields had their own large parking lot that went with them. All of the neighboring schools also had the same thing. There was just never not enough parking at the high school in case there's a million people coming from out of town for a big sporting event. So if you see that and you're like, wow, that is an excessive amount of parking for a high school, A, you are correct, but B, a lot of times, especially once kids reached about the age of 16 and they could drive here, or at least where I grew up, their parents would usually buy them an old beater and they would drive to school instead of taking the bus. So you have all of those kids going to school, driving and parking, and then you also need parking in case there's a big sporting event. Because a lot of those students would drive to school and then just stay at school until the sporting event, so their cars would still be there taking up the spots. You'll also probably notice that as I eventually do the neighborhood towards the end of the video, that there is a lot of fall trees in with these building assets, and that's because I don't really know how Bob works, I don't think. I didn't know you could have like different profiles or anything like that for different cities, and so this build has some of the spillover trees from my Twitch build, which if you guys ever want to watch, you can find the link to my Twitch stream down below. And this map, I'm not really looking to do a fall build on, looking for more of like a summer vibe. I think it would be a lot better to have this map be in summer mode so we can actually see people taking advantage of some of the beaches or going on hikes in the mountains. Because I'm a little worried that if I use Bob to replace some of the trees on the map with fall trees, it'll put fall trees in sections of the map that I don't want. And I don't really feel like nitpicking and going through. So I think that's just probably how we're going to end up doing it. If any of you guys know how Bob works in terms of setting different profiles up for different maps, please let me know down in the comments. I might have looked it up by now, but it'll still be helpful for maybe anybody else out there who is potentially struggling with the same issue that I am. If there's also anything I built today in the background that maybe gives you guys some inspiration for names, especially on the town itself or any kind of lore for it, please let me know down in the comments. I cannot stress enough how much lore actually helps me think of how I actually want to develop the town. For example, on the map of my Twitch stream right now, we built a high school over top of a tunnel for the highway. And the reason we did that is because the town was kind of developed in the 50s as an off-ramp town for the freeway. So it's kind of like a main stop when you get off the freeway for this area and maybe you go shopping there. So they're really relying on the shopping that's over in this section of the area. And I kind of envisioned that the high school was built in the 50s during the Cold War and that maybe they had like a stairwell that went down from the high school that went to an underground fallout shelter or something like that. And I think that is just such a cool concept. And it helped me place the actual school building in a very specific spot, and I was able to start from there and build around it, which really helped me lay things out. So if you guys have any suggestions at all, please put them in the comments below. Now, for those of you who haven't watched my YouTube series before, the way we do things around here is we kind of discuss the build in the beginning, and then the rest of the video, we kind of do speculations on Cities Skylines 2. This past week, I asked you guys for help in my YouTube community tab, and I wanted to know what kind of DLC you wanted or expected Colossal Order to drop. This entire episode will revolve completely around speculation into the DLC for Cities Skylines 2, and this is just a disclaimer that this is all speculation, and I have no expectation that any of this will actually end up being in the game. This is all just for fun, and just so we can have some thoughts and excitement for Cities Skylines 2. I had some thoughts of my own on some possibilities or cool ideas for the DLCs, one of which is actually coupled with a couple of your comments. So I threw out the potential of a Festivals DLC, and Karen suggested that there could be a potential Formula 1 DLC. I think this concept kind of works really well together in the idea that festivals could entirely take over a section or a district or even potentially a specific road or roads of a district and shut them down completely, making your traffic have to adjust to them and adding really cool flair of tourism into the town itself. Not only could this increase the money that your town is receiving, but it could also really present a challenge for your traffic management, as everything you could have prepared or wanted your traffic flow to be could potentially just be dismantled by having your roads shut down. I think this could totally be feasible, especially with the district policies that we have. We can already see that certain policies like the gated community, for example, doesn't apply to highways. If they could go even more into specifics with specific roads, we could set specific roads to act as a festival road that shuts down during them. And the festivals could be short as well. They could only last 1 day night cycle in the game, but that could cause enough challenge for your city in terms of tourism and traffic flow that it could really feel like the event is there. This could be expanded to a lot of other people's comments as well, like Cashman's suggesting protesting, pandemics, movie premieres, and art events, with the latter being the one I'm referencing. However, I'd like to use this as a great segue to talk about another potential DLC that sparked in my brain with protests. Having an entire expansion based around your citizens' happiness and their demands for you to change certain policies in certain parts of your town. I can see this being incredibly challenging to have to completely change how your city functions in terms of policies. It almost feels like Stellaris, for example, where you have different groups of citizens who have different demands and factions, and you need to meet their demands sometimes. You could also go as far as to say districts could have a demand for a service being closer to them rather than in a different area, and maybe you're encouraged to move it out of a district that you have it in and into a different one. Now, one of the ones I've already kind of talked about in my Dev Insights breakdowns, which I do every Thursday, is the potential Pets DLC. We can see in each building when we click on it in Cities Skylines 2 how many pets are in it. So I wonder if the pet mechanic or the city itself needs any kind of services for pets in general, or if they have an expansion in mind that will really grow on this mechanic. We could have things like a veterinary clinic to service the health of your pets, and a need for things like dog parks or dog training classes that can act as an education system for your pets. Obviously, something like a pet cemetery could be added as well for when your pet's life sadly comes to its end. We can even have a pet daycare that people maybe need to take their pet to before going to work, or they could potentially get picked up by a pet-only bus. I think this is a really cool and fun mechanic that gives your pets some individuality, some independence, and some uniqueness that's kind of quirky. Another one that I thought of was an actual true and real mall DLC. I think in a lot of, especially in the US at least, malls are kind of dying. However, in my city, they are expanding and are always packed. The mall closest to where I live is getting a new wing added sometimes within the next year or two, and every time I go there, it's always busy. I think depending on how your community is built and developed, a mall can still be really successful, and I think this could be a really fun and modular, customizable way to develop a shopping area for your citizens. This can be anything from a strip mall to a conventional closed American mall or an open air mall or a European market. Something I always felt like was really lacking in Cities Skylines when building an American city is the lack of big box stores and how essential they are to American life and development. We could obviously have a discussion about the necessity of something like that, but they are a huge part of American cities, and I'd love to see a bit more depth in terms of actually developing an American city, because in Cities Skylines 1, we're basically stuck with mods in order to place something like a big box store. Now, obviously, we have signature buildings coming in Cities Skylines 2, but we have no idea how many of these we can build, and in a real city, you'll have tons of these in an American development. I would love to just have the option to build them. Not that that would be the best for traffic flow or actually developing the city, but just to be able to see it and have it would be absolutely fantastic. The last one that I thought of by myself and was something that I actually really wanted in Cities Skylines was a full prison and crime DLC, or essentially just a rework of the crime system itself. I really like how the prisons that were included in the After Dark DLC actually reformed your citizens and made it so that they wouldn't reoffend, whereas the regular jails would just house them while they waited to go to a prison, or they would just be released with the same chance to cause crime again. I always feel like the crime system was just kind of there but never really touched upon, when it's incredibly important to how cities function, as they take up a large portion of real-life city budgets. For example, the city of LA spends about 38% of its total budget on quote-unquote public protection. Having a high crime could spark things like police chases that could in turn cause accidents, creating even more realistic, challenging traffic flow. And we could have a discussion about the legitimacy of that funding and how much is actually necessary, but it doesn't change the fact that policing in cities is incredibly important in how things are planned and budgeted. And I would love to be able to dive deeper into that in Cities Skylines 2. We could go from an authoritarian police state city to an incredibly reformative or even community policing city. And this could all fall into that protest mechanic that I thought of earlier. Now, on to the things that you guys suggested. Matt SV suggested having a DLC based around different eras, allowing your city to upgrade the eras. This could be very similar to the Industrial Evolution Content Creator Pack from Cities Skylines 1. I recorded this before the Maps and Themes Dev Diary came out, so I'm not too sure how themes could play a part in this yet in terms of the concept, but I know that there is a ton of work that goes into making buildings and their assets themselves, which is why the Content Creator Packs from Cities Skylines 1 usually didn't contain that many buildings, because it is a ton of work for these people to make these models. So it would be a lot of work to create a different version of every single one of these buildings that's included in the game, in terms of futuristic and old school style. My guess is that this would be something that would not be as big a scale as people might anticipate, much like the Industrial Evolution DLC, which was just an industrial side of things in terms of growables, and it wasn't really that many buildings. That being said, I would love some more futuristic buildings, so adding a future DLC could be really cool in terms of adding an old school style coal power plant that was even less efficient but incredibly cheap, or a super futuristic transport building like a space elevator. Many of you have also pointed out that since bikes will no longer be in the game at launch, that we might get a heavy bike-centered DLC. Now, I do hope that some core bike mechanics like bike lanes, or just the bikes themselves for that matter, are in the base game. I know I'm obviously going to probably buy all the DLCs when they come out for Cities Skylines 2, but I think that bikes are such an important part to many cities around the world, and they are even becoming an increasingly more important part and relevant here in America, that I feel like it would be really negligent of Colossal Order to not include some simple aspects of bike development in the base game. That being said, I would love to see them expand more on the bike mechanics with a DLC. Maybe having more advanced bike networks or having bike shares or bike rentals on the side of roads so people don't necessarily have to take their car places, or they could drive to a further away parking lot and then hop onto one of the bikes at the bike shares. This could even be expanded to include an actual rideshare mechanic that could function with cars as well, for things like carpooling and have actual carpool lanes. Another really good idea here came from Caroline, which I think is how you pronounce your name. I'm sorry if I get it wrong. Please let me know in the comments. Was that they think that it might be a good idea to add a daycare or an eldercare DLC. Now, we obviously had childcare and eldercare in Cities Skylines 1, but this just increased the healthcare of those groups. Someone else also pointed out that it's already in the base game of Cities Skylines 2, and that childcare is an add-on for the elementary school, but I'm not sure that's what Caroline meant. Or at least, that's not how I'm going to take the concept. I see this more as an advancement on children who aren't going to school yet, maybe need actual daycare to go to that isn't just an education level. I think it's a lot harder to argue for a potential daycare need being in the game in the future versus elder care, which is something that I think could be totally feasible from Colossal Order. When a sim might reach a really old age, they might not be able to live by themselves, but their character might not be ready to die yet. This is where Eldercare DLC could really fall into play, having things like retirement homes, which Caroline mentioned there is a mod for in Cities Skylines 1. I think expanding on the retirement communities could be a really cool concept, and while I can't essentially think of more things that could be built on other than retirement homes or having specific communities targeted towards older people, I really think that there could be something here if Colossal Order wanted to expand on it. Max here brought up that there is a DLC that they think is highly probable because apparently the Colossal Order CEO said in an interview that they wanted to make citizen classes for Cities Skylines 1 with related needs and policies. They said in the interview to think of business people like white collars or hippies or bikers, artists, etc. But they scrapped the idea because they basically couldn't get it fleshed out in the way they wanted. Now that Cities Skylines 2 has a deeper citizen creation, they are suggesting that they might definitely reconsider this idea. Now, I will say that developers create games and go in specific directions. They will leave old ideas behind, even if they really wanted it previously that didn't work out the first time, because they don't want to rehash them or because they've completely moved on past how they can develop this mechanic. But this could actually be a really cool concept. It's also something that I can see expanded on heavily with mods, creating a bunch of different communities that these sims could be a part of. So a sim could be a white-collar worker who's really into nature and likes pets. Another sim could be really into video games and is a blue-collar worker. Due to their interests, they could want to consume different goods and experiences based on those interests. And then they could potentially fight with their age differences, where I believe they said previously that older sims aren't as interested in consuming video games as a consumable, because as we know, citizens are actually going to stores to buy like a product, basically, and older people are less interested in that. But this sim could have a hard code. They are a gamer and always want that video game consumable. So essentially, all sims can be hard-coded with a couple different traits, and those things will fight against their actual predisposed mechanics. And they've already kind of talked about that some sims will feel that way, whereas a tourist might be less likely to go to the closest tourism to get their fix because they're actually really hard-coded into wanting to go to this tourist attraction that's much further away from them. I think this could add a really good extra level of detail and immersion and almost a connection with the citizens in your city. Little Red Lemon brought up the idea of a Waterways DLC. And the specific part I want to touch on is the idea that water amounts on the map could potentially be susceptible to drought events. I think this is entirely dependent on how the water mechanics actually work, because as we know, we don't really know how the refill rate works for groundwater, and we also just don't know the physics of surface water. In Cities Skylines 1, the physics of surface water was a little clunky, and I know that a lot of people also felt this way as well. If the water mechanics are functionally the same and based on spawn points and how they flow, I don't really see a way for that to work for surface water, unless you can vary the flow in the spawn points themselves. I think it's a really cool concept, and I think it's entirely dependent on how Colossal Order actually implements water into this game. This could even fall into something like a climate change DLC or an expansion of Green Cities DLC that adds an extra element of seasonal changes to things like water, which is something that is so important to many cities like in the Southwest United States in terms of droughts. So that's all the ones I'd like to speculate on for this video. If you guys have more, please put them in the comments down below. And if I think that there is maybe enough to do another video, we'll probably do another one before Cities Skylines 2 comes out. Also, please let me know down below if you guys like the concept of me discussing speculations related to Cities Skylines 2 over the build, or if you'd rather me just talk about the build while it's happening in the background. I really wanted this series to potentially be a bit more unique than the conventional Let's Build series, which is why I wanted to talk about Cities Skylines 2 over it with just some thoughts and ideas from all of you. If you guys really don't like this concept and want me to do just a normal Let's Build series where I talk about things happening on screen, please let me know down in the comments, and who knows, maybe we'll reformat the series if enough people feel that way. In next week's build, I think we're going to expand a lot more on the town's residential. We'll maybe build some more of those McMansions, and I really think that after watching my build back, I think I should just stick to one area at a time as I build it rather than jumping from high school to shopping center back to town development. I'm kind of just used to doing that in my Twitch streams, and I just don't think it works as well for the YouTube videos. But again, let me know what you guys think down in the comments. The more you guys tell me, the more I can make better product for you all. Next week's episode is going to be on the speculative idea that Paradox sim clone Life by You could potentially have an integration with Cities Skylines 2 like SimCity used to do with some of their other Maxis titles like Sim Chopper. In Sim Chopper, you could fly a helicopter around the city that you built in SimCity. I think there's a lot of cool concepts that could be integrated here if they chose to do it, and while I think it's potentially unlikely, I would love to hear what you guys think they could potentially do down in the comments. I'll see you guys next Saturday for the next installment, and I hope you guys enjoy the next Dev Diary and Dev Insight on Monday and Thursday, respectively. I'm also going to be live on Twitch on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday every week, so pop in, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Deuces.